Hello everyone, today I will be telling you a story entitled The Chieftest Mourner by Aida Rivera Ford. But before that, I'm going to tell you about the author of the story. So, who is Aida Rivera Ford? Aida Rivera Ford was born on January 22, 1921, at Hulu, Sulu. It is located somewhere in Mindanao. She was an author, an essayist, a teacher, and a theater artist. She finished a degree of Bachelor of Arts, major in English. She was the first editor of Sand and Coral. It is the official literary folio of Suleiman University. She also graduated cum laude in the same university. So Ida Riverford has been named as the National Fellow for Fiction by the University of Philippines Institute of Creative Writing. In 1980, she established Learning Center for the Arts, which is named for the Academy of the Arts. It is the first fine arts school in Mindanao. Let us now proceed to the story. The Chieftest Mourner is about the death of a poet, leaving his loved ones behind, including his wife and his mistress, which brought controversial issues in his death. But before that, let us first know the characters of the story. First, we have the narrator. She was the niece of the poet and Aunt Sophia. Second is the poet. He was the husband of Aunt Sophia who passed away. Third, we have Aunt Sophia. She was the wife of the poet and aunt of the narrator. Fourth, we have Isa. She was the mistress of the poet. We also have supporting characters such as the relatives of the poet and the people who went to the funeral. So the story happened in the little chapel where the wake is held, also in Aunt Sophia's house and in the poet's house. Later on, we will know what happened in these particular settings. The story started with the narrator who received a letter about the death of her uncle. She stated that he became his uncle because he married her aunt Sophia. She also stated that her uncle was one of the well-known poets in the country, which is the Philippines. She and the poet became so close that when she heard about the news of his death, she felt that a part of her died too. As part of the story, the narrator shares on how she and her uncle, who is the poet, become close. Her aunt told her that her uncle was not really a man who is into marriage because he only get considerate when he's sober. But Sophia's beauty made him commit into marriage. Though they got separated for almost 10 years now, due to the reason that Sophia tied him into a chair as punishment for being drunk. The moment he got untied, he went straight to the door and left Sophia without coming back. And then enters the narrator. She became the bridge of communication between the separated couple. Sophia would send the narrator to the poet's house to know the current state or status of the poet, while the poet take it as a chance to give his written poems to Sophia and to know how she was doing. Through that setup, the narrator and her uncle became close to each other. And every time her aunt would visit their house, her mother and her aunt would talk about the poet's state of misery, proving that he is suffering from the separation. Later on, that setup stopped, and the topic of his aunt and mom is no longer about his uncle. And every time they would talk about it, they used Spanish language, which became the reason why the narrator took her Spanish lessons seriously to understand what they're talking about. And then she knew about the other woman. She knew what La Mujer Isa means. It means that woman Isa. Isa was young and successful, a woman of means, but was his uncle's other woman. Sophia, being a loyal wife, grieved that the poet should have been ensnared by such a woman. She was positive that the poet was unhappier than ever, for that woman never allowed him to have his own way, because the woman followed the poet everywhere, calling herself his wife. So when people mentioned about the poet's wife, they would get confused on which wife they're referring to. Is it the mistress or Sophia? But after a while, a system was worked out by the mutual friends of the different parties. Number one stands for Aunt Sophia, and number two for the other woman. Everything was complicated when the poet was alive, and became more complicated when he died. The narrator was puzzling over who was the official widow of his uncle's funeral. The service was held in a little chapel. At the front was the president's immense rat, leaning heavily backward. Behind it were other rats arranged according to the rank and prominence of the people who had sent them. There were only few people present. There was something grimly ludicrous about the poet's funeral. There were two women taking possession of her portion of the chapel. On the right side sat Aunt Sophia, and on the left the other woman, Isa. The friends of the poet began to come. They would pause a long time at the door, surveying the scene before they marched towards the casket and moved towards Aunt Sophia or the other woman. The women came to talk to Sophia, while most of the men turned to Isa at the left side of the chapel. There were some important Moluccan young men and some writers that the narrator knew who came at the service. Later in the morning, the poet's sisters and cousins swept into the chapel and came to Sophia. The narrator heard one of the women said that the president himself was expected to come in the afternoon. Toward lunchtime, neither Sophia and the woman wished to live ahead of each other, but Sophia got hungry, so they went home for lunch. The narrator and Sophia made up for living ahead of Isa by getting back to the chapel early. The poet's kinswoman arrived, and Sophia was relieved because Isa was not yet there. But at about 3 in the afternoon, the woman arrived. The eyebrows of the women in the chapel started working, and they spoke in whispers. Then the voices rose a trifle until the narrator could hear everything distinctly. Then a cold war happened. The woman won't just let the poet's relatives to bully her and put her in a corner. The poet's sister stopped her from creating a scene in respect to the dead. But Isa blurted how she took good care of the poet while he was suffering in the hospital, and how she sold her jewelries to make money and peddled his books and poems to the publishers so that they could pay the hospital's bill. She also said that none of them came to him while he was sick, and that they're making her leave so that they could have the honors and have picture taken with the president. But one of the clan rebutted to her claims, saying that they didn't care about the honors, they just wanted the poet to be honored, to have a decent and respectable funeral without scandal. The other one added that the woman created enough scandal. That's why they couldn't visit the poet while he was sick because of the presence of the other woman in the hospital. The woman's face went livid with shock and rage. She stood wordless. Her face began to twitch. Then big, noisy sobs came that shook her body and spilled tears down her made up face. In a few quick steps, she stood before the poet's casket, looking at him for seconds. Then she turned to face everyone, saying they can have all that's left of the poet before leaving the chapel. The story ended with the narrator stating that she had seen what she had waited to see. The mascara of the woman had indeed rubbed down her cheeks, but somehow it wasn't funny at all. The theme of the story is focused on love because of how the mistress Isa loved the poet. Second, we have disloyalty. It is when the poet had another woman. Third, we have death. It showcases a natural phenomena in the life of a human being. Then lastly, we have grief. The mistress really grieved to the death of the poet. And the moral of the story is to know the consequences of your action because regrets comes later. Another lesson of the story for me is that love doesn't conquer it all. In this gradually changing world, you need proof in everything you wanted to claim yours. And that's all. Thank you for listening.